He was found in the river with no memory. A medallion may hold the key to his past. But what if his true identity is more dangerous than he imagines? Intrigued? Then stay right there. Subscribe to the channel and discover where this plot will lead. New chapters every week. Dawn had not yet given way today in the small village of Pine Hollow, nestled among the valleys of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Emily Watkins, a 25-year-old daughter of farmers, walked along the trail that bordered Silver Creek, carrying a basket of medicinal herbs she had gathered at daybreak. The fresh mountain air filled her lungs as she prepared for another day of work in the small apothecary she maintained in the back of her house. The sky was beginning to take on orange hues when a strange noise caught her attention. Something or someone seemed to be struggling in the shallow water near the shore. Emily set her basket aside and ran to the spot, finding an unconscious man being dragged by the current, which wasn't strong enough to carry him away but kept him trapped among the rocks. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, throwing herself into the icy water without thinking twice. With effort, Emily managed to pull the man to the shore. His clothes, though soaked and torn, were clearly fine, fabrics she had never seen in local stores. Around his neck, he wore a golden medallion with a strange symbol, a kind of crest that she didn't recognize. His face was marked by abrasions, and a wound on his head was still bleeding slightly. "Sir, can you hear me?" she tried, patting his face lightly. There was no response. Looking around, Emily realized there was no way to quickly call for help. Old Joe, the only one in the village who owned a car, lived on the other side of the mountain. The nearest medical post was almost a 2-hour walk away, and the stranger needed immediate care. Gathering all her strength, she managed to lift him and staggering began the walk to her house. The man was tall and heavy, but the fear of leaving him there, to his own fate, gave her a strength she didn't even know she possessed. When she finally reached home, the sun was already high. Her mother, Martha, nearly fainted when she saw her daughter carrying a bloodied stranger. "Good heavens, girl, who is this man?" "I don't know, Mum. I found him almost drowning in the creek. We need to help him." "What if he's a criminal? A fugitive?" Emily looked at the unconscious face of the man. There was something in his features that inspired anything but fear. "Look at him, Mum. These clothes, this medallion. Whoever he is, he's not from around here." Martha, who besides being a farmer, was known in the village for her knowledge of natural medicine, examined the wound on the stranger's head. "This needs stitches, but we'll have to make do with what we have. I'll prepare an infusion of arnica and calendula. You clean these cuts and change these wet clothes before he catches pneumonia." In the days that followed, Emily and her mother took turns caring for the mysterious man. The high fever that afflicted him in the first few days subsided, and his wounds began to heal. Sometimes, in his feverish delirium, he would mumble disconnected words, as if reliving some traumatic episode. It was on the morning of the 5th day that he finally opened his eyes. Emily was by the bed changing the compresses on his forehead when she noticed the movement of his eyelids. The man's eyes, a deep green, stared at her with a mixture of confusion and fear. Where am I?" His voice came out hoarse and weak. "You're in my house in Pine Hollow. I found you in the creek 5 days ago, almost drowning." He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness made him recede. "Who are you?" he asked, still disoriented. "My name is Emily Watkins." "And yours?" The man frowned as if trying to concentrate on something very difficult. His eyes closed tightly, and drops of sweat began to form on his forehead. I don't know," he finally said, with a tone of growing panic in his voice. "I can't remember my name. I can't remember anything." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. How could someone forget their own name? She tried to calm him, offering him water and assuring him that he was safe. "Easy now, you had a serious head injury. Maybe your memory will come back gradually. We'll call you Ethan. At least until you remember your real name." "Ethan," he repeated as if testing the sound. "It seems strange, but it'll do for now." In the days that followed, Ethan regained his physical strength, but his memory remained an absolute void. He couldn't say where he came from, who his family was, or what he did before being found in the creek. The only object that could give any clue about his identity was the golden medallion, but the symbol engraved on it meant nothing to anyone in Pine Hollow. Curiously, despite not remembering his life, Ethan demonstrated knowledge and skills that completely contrasted with the rural environment. His posture, his way of speaking, and even the way he held cutlery during meals revealed a refined education. When he was strong enough to walk, he insisted on helping with household chores and in tending the medicinal herb garden. Emily noticed that, although he was completely clumsy at first, he learned with impressive speed. "You have the hands of someone who's never held a hoe," she commented one afternoon, watching him try without much success to loosen the soil for planting. "Maybe I was a professor? A writer," he speculated, studying his own hands that indeed had no calluses or marks of manual labor. "Maybe," Emily smiled, "or perhaps a charming prince who fell from the sky just to give me a headache." They both laughed, but there was an element of truth in that joke that neither of them could imagine. Ethan's arrival had transformed Emily's quiet routine. Something in the mystery of that man intrigued her, and against her will, she found herself increasingly curious about his past. What Emily didn't know was that, hundreds of miles away, in the sumptuous Highland Hall, the news of Ethan's disappearance was causing a political earthquake that threatened to shake the power structures of the wealthy Mitchell family and, consequently, of the entire state. The weeks went by, and Ethan completely integrated into the Watkins family routine. Not knowing where to go or who to look for, he accepted Martha's generous offer to stay until his memory returned. In exchange, he helped with the property's chores and learned about the cultivation of medicinal herbs that were the family's main source of income. On a particularly hot afternoon, while organizing the shelves of the small apothecary, Emily noticed that Ethan had developed an impressive knowledge about the properties of plants. "How do you know that chamomile shouldn't be mixed with this other herb?" "I never taught you that," she asked, intrigued. Ethan stopped, looking at the plants in his hands as if they were a puzzle. "I don't know. It just came to my mind, as if someone had told me this a long time ago." Emily smiled, excited about the possibility. "That's good. Maybe your memory is returning gradually. What else do you remember?" Ethan closed his eyes, concentrating. "Nothing concrete, just sensations. Sometimes when I'm almost asleep, I see flashes of a large place with lots of people, tall walls, huge windows, but it could just be a dream. Or it could be your home," Emily suggested, feeling a tightness in her chest at the thought that one day Ethan might leave. That same night during dinner, Robert, Emily's father and a man of few words, finally expressed what was bothering him. "Son, it's been almost 2 months since you've been here. If you don't remember who you are, maybe it's time to decide what you're going to do with your life. You can't forever depend on our charity." "Dad!" Emily reprimanded, but Ethan raised his hand, signaling that it was okay. "Robert is right. I've taken advantage of your hospitality too much. Tomorrow I'll go to town to look for some work." "And what will you work as? You don't even have ID," Martha countered, giving her husband a look of disapproval. "I can start with simple jobs. What matters is not being a burden to you," Ethan responded with dignity. The next day, ignoring the protests of Emily and Martha, Ethan headed to town with Robert, who was going to sell his corn production. Little Riverdale, the town closest to Pine Hollow, was a modest but lively commercial center. The narrow streets of the historic center were always full of farmers, merchants, and tourists who came to see the natural beauty of the region. While Robert negotiated with buyers, Ethan wandered the streets, observing everything with an almost childlike curiosity. Each storefront, each building, seemed to awaken something in his mind, as if he were seeing everything for the first time, but at the same time, there was a strange familiarity. It was when passing by a bookstore that something really caught his attention. In the window was displayed a book about the history of great American families. On the cover, a crest very similar to the one on his medallion. Without thinking twice, he entered the store. "Can I help you?" asked the bookseller, a middle-aged gentleman with thick glasses. "This book in the window about American families. Could you show it to me?" The bookseller promptly attended to him. Ethan flipped through the pages eagerly until he found what he was looking for. The crest identical to his medallion, belonging to the Mitchell family, one of the most influential in the country, with origins dating back to the colonial period. "The Mitchells," he murmured, feeling slightly dizzy. "A fascinating family," commented the bookseller. "The current patriarch, William Mitchell, transformed the family fortune into an agribusiness empire. They say his only son is about to take over the business after the old man finally decides to retire." "Only son?" Ethan asked, feeling his heart race. "Yes, Connor Mitchell. A brilliant young man, from what they say, educated at the best universities abroad." Ethan looked at the photo of the young heir in the book. The face told him nothing, but the name Connor provoked a strange resonance in his mind. Connor Ethan, could it be possible? Without money to buy the book, Ethan thanked the bookseller and left, feeling dazed. On the way back, he couldn't talk about his discovery with Robert. What if he was wrong? What if it was just a coincidence? He needed to be sure before creating expectations. Upon returning to the Watkins house, he found Emily waiting for him anxiously. "So, did you find any work?" "Not exactly," he replied, still absorbed in his thoughts. "But I think I discovered something about my past." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Ethan and Emily sat on the porch of the house under a starry sky that only the deep countryside of America could offer. There, he shared his theory about possibly being Connor Mitchell, the heir to one of the most powerful families in the country. "If this is true, why would you be here alone, almost drowning in a creek in the middle of nowhere?" questioned Emily, part of her wishing it was all just a big misunderstanding. "I don't know, maybe I had some kind of accident or someone tried to get rid of you," Emily completed, expressing what they both feared to think. The silence that followed was loaded with possibilities, none of them comforting. If Ethan really was Connor Mitchell, his life was very far from the tranquil mountains of Pine Hollow. It was a life of wealth, power, and apparently, danger. "I need to discover the truth," he finally said. "I need to go to New York, look for this Mitchell family, see if they recognize me. And what if it's they who tried to, it's a risk I need to take. I can't live the rest of my life without knowing who I really am." Emily nodded, understanding, but her heart felt heavy as lead. In the last few months, something had blossomed between them. Something that neither had verbalized, but that was there, growing silently with each look, each conversation by the wood stove, each walk through the herb fields. "Emily," Ethan said softly, taking her hands in his. "You saved my life. You gave me a home when I had nothing, not even my own name. I'll never forget that, no matter what happens." She smiled sadly, fighting back tears. "You need to do what you think is right. Just promise you'll be careful." "I promise. And I also promise that whatever the truth is, I'll come back to tell you personally." The next morning, Ethan announced to the family his decision to go to New York. Robert, pragmatic as always, offered him some money he had been keeping under the mattress. "Just a loan, son. I want every cent back when you become rich." Martha prepared a bag with medicinal herbs and enough food for the journey. Her hands trembled as she tied the package, as if sensing that an important page of their lives was about to be turned. The bus to New York passed through Riverdale only once a week. When the day came, the whole family went to say goodbye to Ethan at the small bus station in town. The farewell was brief, laden with contained emotion, especially between Ethan and Emily, who could barely look each other in the eye without tears threatening to fall. "Remember your promise," she said, when they finally had a moment alone. "I'll come back," he assured. "One way or another, I'll come back to you." The bus departed, taking Ethan to an uncertain future and leaving behind an Emily divided between hope and fear. She didn't know what would be worse, discovering that Ethan was really Connor Mitchell, the heir to an empire, or that his theory was wrong and he would continue to be a man without a past, without history, without a home. What neither of them could imagine was that, as the bus followed the highway toward the Big Apple, a sinister conspiracy was underway, involving not only Ethan's fate, but that of the entire Mitchell family. The imposing metropolis of New York received Ethan with its habitual indifference, The Port Authority bus terminal buzzed with hurried people, each absorbed in their own trajectory. For someone accustomed to the tranquility of Pine Hollow in recent months, the impact was overwhelming. The noises, the lights, the constant movement, everything seemed amplified as if his senses were being tested to the limit. "Taxi, mister?" offered a driver as soon as Ethan left the terminal, seeming to recognize his air of disorientation. "No, thank you," he responded automatically, realizing immediately that he had no idea where to go. Sitting on a nearby bench, Ethan tried to organize his thoughts. The money borrowed from Robert wouldn't last long in the big city. He needed to be strategic. He took out the notebook where he had written down information about the Mitchell family, collected from newspapers and magazines available in Riverdale. According to his research, the headquarters of Mitchell Enterprises was on Park Avenue, in the financial heart of the city. Determined, he used part of the money to buy a subway ticket and embarked on the adventure of navigating the megalopolis's transportation system. Curiously, despite never having been there, at least not in his recent memory, something in the layout of the lines, in the colors of the stations, seemed vaguely familiar. Perhaps it was just the universal logic of subway systems, he thought. Upon emerging on Park Avenue, Ethan was immediately struck by a strange sensation. The horizon of skyscrapers, the movement of cars, even the characteristic smell of urban pollution, all of this provoked disconnected flashes in his mind, like photographs of a life that seemed to have belonged to someone else. It wasn't difficult to locate the headquarters of Mitchell Enterprises. The glass and steel tower rose majestically, with the family name emblazoned in golden letters on the facade. In the lobby, an elegant reception desk was guarded by security personnel in suits. Ethan took a deep breath and approached the receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile. "Good morning. I'd like to speak with someone from the Mitchell family." The receptionist raised an eyebrow without losing her smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's an urgent and personal matter." "I'm sorry, but the Mitchell family doesn't receive people without a prior appointment. You can leave your information and the reason for your visit, and someone will contact you when there's availability." Ethan hesitated. How to explain that? He believed he was the disappeared son of the family patriarch, without sounding like a lunatic or worse, a scammer. "Please, it's really important. I have this," he said, showing the medallion he had carried with him since Emily found him. "I believe it belongs to the family." The receptionist examined the object with curiosity, but maintained her professional posture. "I'll check if someone from the public relations department can see you. Your name, please?" Ethan hesitated again. Ethan, just Ethan. While waiting, seated in one of the armchairs of the luxurious lobby, Ethan observed the movement. Well-dressed executives, efficient secretaries, hurried messengers, all seemed like well-adjusted pieces of a powerful machinery. Did he really belong to that world? After almost an hour of waiting, a middle-aged man approached. He wore an impeccable suit and carried a leather briefcase. "Mr. Ethan, I'm Richard Taylor, from the legal department of Mitchell Enterprises. I heard you have something that you believe belongs to the family." Ethan stood up, surprised by the presence of a lawyer instead of someone from public relations. "Yes, this, a medallion. But actually I came for another reason. I believe I might be Connor Mitchell." The lawyer's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. And do you have any proof of this extraordinary claim besides that medallion, which I must say could be easily acquired in any antique shop in the city?" "Not exactly. I had an accident and lost my memory. But several indications led me to believe that I might be him. Indications such as, like the fact that I was found a few months ago injured near Pine Hollow. The medallion was with me, and my physical characteristics, my way of speaking." Richard Taylor studied him for a moment, as if evaluating not just his words, but his entire being. "Mr. Ethan, is it? I must inform you that Connor Mitchell is doing very well and is present at the company every day. You can see him right now if you wish." The ground seemed to open beneath Ethan's feet. How was that possible? His entire theory was crumbling in seconds. That can't be right. I'm sure that I can prove it." interrupted the lawyer, taking out his cell phone. After a few taps, he turned the screen to Ethan. It was a recent news item showing a young man in a suit at a gala event. The caption identified him as Connor Mitchell, heir to the Mitchell Empire, alongside his fiancée, Vanessa Reynolds. The face on the cell phone was different from his. Completely different. I must have been mistaken, murmured Ethan, suddenly feeling dizzy. This happens more often than you might imagine, said Richard, with a tone that mixed understanding and condescension. Rich families always attract this kind of confusion. If you want to leave the medallion for analysis, we can verify its authenticity and origin. No, Ethan responded quickly, holding the medallion tightly. It was the only concrete clue he had about his past. I'll keep it with me for now, sorry for the inconvenience. As he left the building, Ethan felt completely defeated. His only theory had proven wrong, and now he was alone in a huge city without enough money and without any clue about who he really was. Walking aimlessly down Park Avenue, he tried to process the shock. If he wasn't Connor Mitchell, who could he be? And why did he carry a medallion with the family crest? He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he almost didn't notice when someone pulled him into a side alley. It was a man about 50, grey hair, face marked by time. "Are you crazy to show up like this?" said the man in a low voice, nervously looking around. "When they called me saying someone had presented himself as Connor Mitchell, I thought it was a sick joke." Ethan stared at him, confused. "Excuse me, but who are you?" The man frowned, studying Ethan's face with attention. "You really don't recognize me, Lucas." "Lucas? My name is not Lucas." The man took a step back, seeming to finally notice the almost imperceptible scars on Ethan's face. "What happened to you? Was the accident real?" "Accident? What accident? Please, if you know something about me, I need you to tell me." The man looked around once more, visibly nervous. "We can't talk here. Meet me in an hour at Bryant Park, across the avenue. Come, alone. And for God's sake, don't go back to that building." Before Ethan could react, the man disappeared into the crowd of pedestrians. The next hour was an agony of doubts and theories. Who was Lucas? Why had that stranger confused him with someone named Lucas? And what accident was he talking about? Punctually, Ethan arrived at Bryant Park, a green oasis in the middle of the concrete of Park Avenue. The man was sitting on an isolated bench, apparently absorbed in reading a newspaper. "Sit down," he said without raising his eyes, "and don't look directly at me. Just pretend we're having a casual encounter." Ethan obeyed, intrigued. "Who are you? And who is Lucas?" "My name is Frank Morgan. I was, or still am, I don't know anymore, personal advisor to William Mitchell for more than 20 years. And Lucas Mitchell is his nephew, Connor's second cousin." "And you think I'm this Lucas?" "You're the spitting image of him. Or rather, he was your spitting image before the accident. That car that went off the road toward Pine Hollow, everyone thought you had died. The body was never found, but after 3 weeks of searching, the family held a symbolic funeral." Ethan's head was spinning with the revelations. "But why did you say I was crazy to show up like this? What's going on?" Frank hesitated, carefully folding the newspaper. Lucas discovered something big enough to make him flee. You're in a hurry. The next day, his car was found destroyed in a ravine. The police concluded it was an accident, but you think it wasn't. "I'm certain it wasn't. Lucas called me a few hours before supposedly dying. He was terrified, said he had proof that Connor was not who everyone thought he was." "What do you mean?" According to Lucas, the real Connor, Mitchell did not return from a trip to Europe 3 years ago. Who came back was someone else. Someone with a similar appearance, trained to take his place. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. "That sounds crazy." "It's what I thought too, but Lucas was stubborn, and if he said he had proof..." "And why would someone do that? Replace the heir to an empire? Power, money, control. William is sick, more than the press knows. Whoever controls Connor controls the future of Mitchell Enterprises, and we're talking billions at stake." Ethan was trying to process everything. It was too much for someone who until a few hours ago believed he was someone else. If what you say is true, I'm Lucas Mitchell, and someone tried to eliminate me because I discovered a conspiracy involving the fake Connor. Exactly. And now that you've appeared alive, you're in danger again. We need to get you out of here. They must already know that you were in the building today. Who are they? That I don't know for sure, but I suspect that William's right-hand man, Victor Manning, is involved. He's always been too ambitious and in recent years has gained a frightening influence over old Mitchell. Frank stood up, still avoiding looking directly at Ethan. I have a safe apartment in Brooklyn. You can stay there while we decide the next step. Take this cell phone. I've already saved my number. Don't use it for anything else, understood? Ethan nodded, feeling like a character in a spy movie. And what do we do now? First, we need to confirm if you really are Lucas. Your complete memory loss complicates everything, but there must be some mark, scar, something that can prove it. Ethan instinctively touched the medallion. This medallion, did it belong to Lucas? Yes, it was a family heirloom. William gave a similar one to Connor and another to Lucas when they were teenagers, a Mitchell tradition. That confirmation sent a wave of shock through Ethan's body. It was real. He was Lucas Mitchell. That night, alone in the Brooklyn apartment, Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind was buzzing with the day's revelations. If he was indeed Lucas, he needed to recover his memory, find the evidence he had discovered before the accident. But how? And more importantly, he needed to warn Emily. She would be worried, waiting for news. Using the cell phone Frank had given him, he sent a message to the only telephone in Pine Hollow, Joe's General Store, which was a few miles from the Watkins house. Emily, I found some answers. I'm not who we thought, but I've discovered clues about my past. I'm safe, but I can't come back yet. Trust me, Ethan. He knew the message was too cryptic, but it was the best he could do without putting Emily in danger. After sending it, he removed the battery from the cell phone as Frank had instructed. What Ethan didn't know was that, at that exact moment, Victor Manning was receiving a detailed report about the strange visitor who claimed to be Connor Mitchell. And along with the report, an image captured by the building's security cameras, an image that made the always composed Victor drop his coffee cup. Impossible, he murmured, staring at the face that, despite the subtle differences caused by the scars, was unmistakably that of Lucas Mitchell. The sun had barely risen in Pine Hollow when Emily received Ethan's message. Old Joe, the owner of the only store with a telephone in the region, had sent his youngest son to deliver the message as soon as he received it. The words written on the crumpled paper made the young woman's heart race. Not who they thought. What clues were these, and why couldn't he come back? Any news from the young man? Asked Martha, noticing her daughter's agitation. Yes, he's fine, but it seems things are more complicated than we imagined, replied Emily, tucking the note into her apron pocket. Throughout the day, she tried to concentrate on daily tasks, but her mind constantly flew to New York. What would be happening with Ethan? Who was he really? The uncertainty was an almost physical weight, oppressing her chest with each breath. At nightfall, she made a decision. She wouldn't stay there waiting. If Ethan was in trouble, she needed to help him. After all, it was she who had found him, who had cared for him, who... She didn't allow the thought to complete. It wasn't time to think about what she felt for him. After a brief discussion with her parents, who tried to dissuade her, Emily began to organize her trip to New York. She had never been to the big city, but had a distant cousin who lived there. With some luck and the help of old Joe to mediate the contact, she would find accommodation. Meanwhile, in New York, Ethan was going through his own ordeal. Frank had returned to the Brooklyn apartment, bringing a folder full of documents, photos, and newspaper clippings. I managed to gather everything I could about you, about Lucas, he explained, spreading the material on the table. Maybe something here will trigger your memory. Ethan carefully examined each item. Photos of Lucas at different ages, at his college graduation, at social events, on trips around the world. In all of them, the physical resemblance was undeniable, even considering the scars that now marked his face. One photo in particular caught his attention. It showed Lucas on a yacht, alongside an older man and a young man of the same age, all smiling, with champagne glasses in their hands. That's William, explained Frank, pointing to the older man. And that next to him is Connor, or rather the real Connor before being replaced, completed Ethan, feeling a strange familiarity when observing his cousin's face. There were also documents about Lucas's career. Graduated in international law, he worked as a legal consultant for Mitchell Enterprises, especially in negotiations with foreign partners. He was fluent in 5 languages and known for his brilliance in the most complex negotiations. "You were always the genius of the family," commented Frank with a nostalgic smile. "William used to say that Connor had the charisma, but you had the brains." As he absorbed this information, Ethan felt increasingly disconnected. It was like looking at the life of a stranger. None of it awakened concrete memories, just vague sensations, fleeting déjà vu. And what about the accident? How exactly did it happen? Frank sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "It was on the road that connects New York to Pine Hollow. You were driving alone at night. According to the police investigation, your car lost control on a curve and fell into a ravine. The vehicle was found completely destroyed the next day. Because of the heavy rain and the difficult-to-access location, the searches were complicated. After 3 weeks without finding your body, the police concluded that you were probably dragged away by the river that runs at the bottom of the valley, and no one suspected anything. William demanded a rigorous investigation, but Victor convinced him it was unnecessary to prolong the family's suffering. I remember how persuasive he was, arguing that constantly reliving the tragedy would only bring more pain." Ethan absorbed each word, trying to mentally reconstruct the events. "You mentioned that I called you before the accident. What exactly did I say?" "You were agitated, talking fast. You said you discovered that Connor had been replaced by an imposter after his trip to Europe 3 years ago, that you had concrete proof and were coming to meet me, but you never arrived." "What kind of proof?" "You didn't specify. You just said it was irrefutable and that it involved Victor and an international organization." Ethan stood up, nervously, walking around the apartment. The frustration of not being able to remember was almost unbearable. "I need to recover that evidence. It must be somewhere. In my office, in my house." "Impossible. Victor took control of all your belongings after your death. Your apartment was emptied, your documents transferred to the company's confidential files. If there was something compromising, he certainly got rid of it." A heavy silence fell over them. The task seemed impossible. How to prove a conspiracy without evidence when Ethan himself couldn't remember what he had discovered? It was then that an idea emerged in his mind. "Frank, you said the accident was near Pine Hollow, right?" "Yes, on the road that crosses the mountains. Why?" "I was found by Emily on the banks of a creek in the vicinity of the village. It can't be a coincidence. If I was going to meet you with evidence, maybe it's still with me." "But you had nothing when you were found besides the medallion." "Not with me physically, but..." Ethan touched his own head. "What if I hid the evidence somewhere near where I was attacked, anticipating that I could be intercepted?" Frank's eyes shone with new enthusiasm. "It's possible. You were always cautious, almost paranoid regarding the security of sensitive information. That's why William trusted you so much for international negotiations." "I need to go back to Pine Hollow," decided Ethan. "I need to retrace my steps from that night. It's risky. Victor probably already knows you're alive. He must be monitoring all your possible movements. I have no choice. It's our only lead." At that very moment, almost 300 miles away, Emily was boarding the bus to New York. The journey would be long and tiring, but determination shone in her eyes. She carried with her not only the few savings she had managed to gather in a hurry, but also the hope of finding Ethan and, somehow, helping him unravel his past. What she didn't know was that, at the same time, other people were also mobilizing. In the luxurious office on the 40th floor of the Mitchell building, Victor Manning was meeting with 3 men of severe appearance. On the table, photos of Ethan captured by security cameras. "I want him found as quickly as possible," ordered Victor. "Alive, preferably. We need to know what he remembers and, more importantly, who else knows about this." "And if he has already recovered his memory?" asked one of the men. Victor pulled a pistol from the desk drawer, placing it gently on the polished wood. In that case, make sure he loses it definitively. On the other side of the city, in the Brooklyn apartment, Ethan and Frank were also preparing. The journey back to Pine Hollow would be risky. Victor certainly had eyes everywhere, especially on the obvious routes. "We can't go by the main road," warned Frank. "I know someone who can take us through alternative routes. It will take longer, but it's safer." While organizing the logistics, Ethan felt a growing uneasiness. He remembered Emily, the way her dark eyes lit up when she smiled, how her small hands worked with precision when manipulating medicinal herbs. He thought of dinners by lamplight, of night conversations on the porch under the starry sky of the mountains. It was strange how those few months in Pine Hollow seemed more real, more vivid in his memory than all the past that Frank had revealed to him. "Frank," he suddenly called, "do you think it's possible that I sent the evidence somewhere safe? A safe deposit box maybe, or a trusted lawyer?" "Possible, yes, but you never mentioned anything like that. In the last few weeks before the accident, you were increasingly reserved, almost paranoid. You even installed additional security systems." "In your apartment?" Ethan frowned, trying to force his mind to cooperate. "I feel like I'm forgetting something obvious, something that's right in front of me, but I can't see it." Meanwhile, the bus carrying Emily advanced through the night, getting closer and closer to New York. The young woman looked out the window, observing the distant lights of the cities and farms that bordered the highway. Her mind was filled with questions, fears and hopes. A single certainty guided her. She would find Ethan no matter how big and frightening the city was, no matter who he really was. What none of them could imagine was that their paths were about to cross again in circumstances much more dangerous than they could foresee, and that the true enigma behind Connor Mitchell's identity was even darker and more complex than they suspected. The New York bus terminal buzzed with the usual morning bustle when the bus that brought Emily finally arrived. Exhausted from the long overnight journey, the young woman from Pine Hollow looked around, feeling tiny before the magnitude of the metropolis. The plan had seemed simple when she formulated it. Arrive in the city, find her cousin Sarah's house, discover Ethan's whereabouts. Now, immersed in urban chaos, the naivety of her expectations was painfully clear. Following the instructions, written on a crumpled piece of paper, she managed to find the subway and board the line that would take her to Queens, in the eastern part of the city, where Sarah lived. During the journey, she watched, fascinated, the human anthill that moved in almost mechanical synchrony, everyone seeming to know exactly where they were going, except her. Sarah received her cousin with a mixture of surprise and concern. They hadn't seen each other in years since Emily was a teenager, and Sarah still visited Pine Hollow during vacations. "Are you crazy to come like this, without properly letting me know?" "New York is no place to venture alone, girl," complained the woman while preparing a strong coffee for the newcomer. Seated in the small kitchen of the modest apartment, Emily finally revealed the true reason for her trip. She told about the man she had found in the creek, about the months they had lived together, about his trip to New York in search of answers, and the mysterious message she had received. "So you crossed half the state after a man who doesn't even know who he really is," summarized Sarah, incredulous, "and who now sent you an enigmatic message saying he's in danger. Emily, don't you see this could be dangerous?" "I know it seems crazy," admitted Emily, "but you don't understand. He's not just any man, he's special." Sarah sighed, recognizing in her cousin's eyes that unmistakable glow that no rational argument could erase. "And where do you plan to start looking for him? New York has more than 8 million inhabitants." Emily hesitated. This part of the plan was still nebulous. "He mentioned that he went to the building of an important company on Park Avenue. I thought of starting there." "Do you at least know which company?" "Not exactly, but it has something to do with a family called Mitchell." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mitchell? Mitchell Enterprises? You're kidding, right? You know them?" "Everyone knows. It's one of the largest business conglomerates in the country." "Wait a minute." Sarah disappeared into the living room and returned with a business magazine. On the cover, a middle-aged man with a severe expression. The headline read, "William Mitchell, the patriarch who transformed American agribusiness." Is this the kind of people your friend is looking for? Emily, what trouble have you gotten yourself into? Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ethan and Frank were finalizing preparations for their clandestine journey to Pine Hollow. Using fake documents that Frank had obtained through contacts he preferred not to reveal, they planned to leave the city by secondary routes, avoiding main highways and toll booths with cameras. I'm almost certain Victor is monitoring the city exits, explained Frank. He has contacts at all levels of public security. That powerful? You have no idea. In recent years, especially after Connor's replacement, his influence has grown exponentially. Today, he practically controls the group's operations, using William as a decorative figure. Ethan observed a map of the region, trying to mentally reconstruct the route he would have taken on the night of the accident. If I was going to meet you with the evidence, why would I take the road to Pine Hollow? It doesn't make geographical sense. Frank frowned, processing the question. Indeed, it's a considerable detour. Unless I had another reason to go in that direction, completed Ethan. Maybe the evidence was there. Or maybe you were being followed and tried to lose them. The theory made sense. If Lucas suspected he was being monitored, he could have tried an alternative route for the meeting with Frank. We need to retrace exactly the path where the car was found, decided Ethan. If there was any chance I hid something in the vicinity before the accident, I need to be there to try to remember. At that moment, the disposable cell phone that Frank carried vibrated. It was an encrypted message from one of his contacts inside Mitchell Enterprises. Bad news, he announced, after deciphering the code. Victor sent a team to Pine Hollow. They left this morning. Ethan felt his blood freeze in his veins. Emily, her family is in danger. Who? The people who took care of me. If Victor discovered where I've been, these months he'll go after them to get information. Without hesitation, Ethan took his own disposable cell phone and composed a quick message to Joe's general store. Danger. Dangerous men heading to the village. Warn Watkins' family to leave home immediately. This is not a joke. He pressed send, knowing the message might arrive too late. We need to go now, he insisted, with an urgency that Frank had never seen in the always controlled Lucas Mitchell. We're just waiting for the contact who will get us out of the city. Should arrive in an hour. We don't have an hour, Frank. Innocent people are in danger because of me. The intensity in Ethan's gaze silenced any counter-argument Frank might have had. Lucas, the brilliant lawyer he had known, had always been calculating, rational. This man before him, moved by genuine concern for strangers in a distant village, was someone different. I'll call to hurry things up, he finally yielded. Back in Queens, Emily was preparing for her expedition to Park Avenue. Sarah, after many frustrated attempts to dissuade her, finally agreed to help. My brother-in-law works as security in one of the commercial buildings there. I'll call him, see if he can get any information about Mitchell Enterprises. While Sarah made the call, Emily examined again the magazine with the article about the Mitchell family. Besides William, there were photos of his son, Connor, a young man with an arrogant expression, and his fiancée, an international model. Nothing. They're connected to the gentle and humble man she had known as Ethan. Great, announced Sarah, returning from the call. Jake will meet us at the cafe across from the Mitchell Enterprises building at 2 in the afternoon. He knows everyone in security there. Punctually at 2, Emily and Sarah were seated in the indicated cafe, observing the imposing building across the avenue. Jake, a burly man in a security uniform, joined them, clearly intrigued by his sister-in-law's unusual request. So, you're looking for a friend who came to visit Mitchell Enterprises? He questioned, addressing Emily. Yes, he came to New York a few days ago looking for information about his identity. He believed he had some connection with the Mitchell family. Jake scratched his chin, thoughtful. Well, there was a strange incident yesterday. A man showed up saying he was Connor Mitchell, but obviously he wasn't. Caused a bit of a stir. Security approached him, but he left before they could ask more questions. Emily's heart raced. What did he look like? Did he have scars on his face? Medium height, broad shoulders, green eyes? Exactly like that, you know him. It's him. It's Ethan. Where did he go? Do you know? Jake shook his head. No, but Wait, he was seen talking to an older man in Bryant Park right after leaving the building. One of the security guards who was off duty saw them. What older man? Pressed Emily. Frank Morgan, William Mitchell's personal advisor. They say they're very close. Emily was trying to process this new information when her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from old Joe. Urgent. Your father called. Unknown men appeared in the village asking about Ethan. Family is hiding at Zeke Hill's house. They're scared. Fear froze her blood. Who were these men? What did they want with Ethan, and why would they be interrogating her family? I need to find him immediately, she said, her voice trembling with urgency. My family is in danger. Jake and Sarah exchanged concerned looks. If he's with Frank Morgan, he could be anywhere, explained Jake. Morgan has resources, connections. He's not someone you find easily when he doesn't want to be found. I need to try, insisted Emily. This Frank Morgan must have an address, an office, something. His office is in the Mitchell Enterprises building itself, but I doubt they're there now, especially if there's something strange going on. As they were talking, a black car discreetly parked across the street. Two men in suits with almost imperceptible earpieces got out of the vehicle and looked directly at the cafe. Jake immediately noticed. Mitchell Enterprises Private Security, he murmured, and they're looking at us. How would they know? Began Sarah. Surveillance cameras, Jake explained quickly. They must be looking for anyone asking about yesterday's incident. Without wasting time, Jake led the two women through the back of the cafe, through the kitchen, and to a secondary exit that gave onto a parallel street. Go somewhere crowded. Shopping mall, subway, anywhere with lots of people. Don't go home. For now, he instructed. But what about Ethan? Protested Emily. If these men are after him, and now possibly after you, the best thing you can do is stay safe. I'll try to find out more about Frank Morgan, where he might have taken your friend. The moment the two women disappeared into the crowd on the side street, the men in suits entered the cafe, their gazes scanning every corner of the establishment. A few miles away, Ethan and Frank were finally leaving New York in a cargo truck hidden among boxes of electronic products. The plan was to follow secondary roads to the highway that crossed the Blue Ridge Mountains, avoiding the checkpoints where Victor's men might be waiting. As soon as we get to Pine Hollow, we need to find the Watkins family, insisted Ethan. Make sure they're safe before anything else. And then? Asked Frank. Then we go back to the place where I was found. If there's any clue about what I discovered, it must be there. What none of them knew was that Emily was also heading to Pine Hollow, determined to protect her family and, if possible, find Ethan along the way. And that Victor Manning, having received reports about the strange movement around the building, had already connected the dots and sent a second team to intercept the fugitives before they reached the village. The race against time had begun, and at its center, a medallion with the Mitchell crest that, without anyone suspecting, contained within itself the key to the entire mystery. Twilight was painting the sky with orange hues when the truck transporting Ethan and Frank finally arrived in the vicinity of Pine Hollow. They had traveled a tortuous path, along secondary roads and almost abandoned trails, to throw off possible pursuers. Let's get off here, instructed Frank, when the vehicle slowed down at a sharp curve. We'll make the rest of the way on foot, through the woods. It's safer. Night was falling rapidly as the two men advanced through the dense forest that covered the mountain slope. Ethan led the way, guided by an instinctive familiarity with the region that surprised even himself. How do you know where to go? Asked Frank, breathless, trying to keep up. I can't explain. It's as if my body remembers, even if my mind doesn't. After almost 2 hours of exhausting walking, they sighted the first lights of the small village. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of relief and apprehension. There was the place that had been his home in recent months, the only place where he had truly felt at peace since losing his memory. The Watkins house is in that direction. He pointed to a set of more distant lights in the lower part of the valley. Cautiously, they approached the house. It was completely dark and silent, a stark contrast to the family's usual animation. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. Something was wrong. They're not here, he whispered after a quick inspection through the windows. Maybe they received. Your warning in time, pondered Frank. With no other option, they decided to head to the only place where they could get information, Joe's General Store. Walking along the dark trails, avoiding the main road, they reached the back of the establishment. A faint light still shone in the back window. Ethan knocked softly on the door. After a few tense moments, the sound of locks being opened was heard, and old Joe's wrinkled face appeared in a crack. "Good Lord," exclaimed the old shopkeeper upon recognizing Ethan. "Come in quickly, son, before someone sees you." Inside the store, old Joe reported the events of the last few hours. Unknown men had arrived at the village asking questions about Ethan. Frightened, Robert and Martha had taken refuge in a friend's house high up in the mountains. "And Emily?" asked Ethan, fearing the answer. "She's not with them. She left for New York 2 days ago looking for you." The news hit Ethan like a physical blow. Emily in New York alone, possibly in danger because of him. "I need to go back immediately," he decided, but Frank restrained him. "We can't. Victor must have men waiting for us on all routes to the city. Our only chance is to find the evidence and use it against him." "But Emily, she went looking for you on Park Avenue," interrupted old Joe. "She sent a message this morning. She was with a cousin looking for information about some Mitchell family." "If she was seen at the building," began Frank, exchanging a worried look with Ethan. "Victor will connect her to me," completed Ethan. "We need to find that evidence now. It's our only hope of protecting her." With precise directions from old Joe about the place where Emily had found Ethan months ago, the two men departed immediately. The night was clear with a full moon illuminating the mountainous landscape. After half an hour of walking along the creek bank, Ethan recognized the location, a small cove where the waters formed a backwater among the rocks. "It was here," he said, feeling a strange vertigo. Fragments of memory began to surface. Headlights in the darkness, the impact of a car leaving the road, his own body being thrown from the vehicle during the rollover. "I remember falling, rolling down the slope, the creek," he murmured, trying to organize the chaotic images that emerged in his mind. "I knew they were following me. I knew I wouldn't make it to you with the evidence." "So what did you do with it?" pressed Frank. Ethan closed his eyes, concentrating intensely. The images became clearer. Himself, injured, dragging himself along the creek bank, knowing he didn't have much time. Instinctively, his hand moved to the medallion he wore around his neck. The Mitchell family symbol gleamed under the moonlight. "The medallion," he whispered, as if fearing the trees themselves might hear him. "The evidence is here, with us all along." With trembling fingers, he examined the jewel he had carried with him since the accident. Apparently it was just an ordinary medallion, but when pressed in a certain way, the front part opened, revealing a secret compartment. Inside, a tiny memory card. "Unbelievable," murmured Frank. "A hiding place worthy of a spy movie." "Typical. Of Lucas, apparently," smiled Ethan, still surprised by his former self's ingenuity. They didn't have time to celebrate the discovery. The sound of vehicles approaching on the road above alerted them to imminent danger. "It's them," said Frank, pulling Ethan into the protection of the trees. "They must have followed our trail from the store." Hidden in the dense vegetation, they observed 3 black SUVs parking on the road above. Armed men descended, led by a figure Frank immediately recognized. "Victor," he whispered. "He came personally." Ethan's heart almost stopped when he saw who else was getting out of the vehicle. Emily, with her hands tied in front of her body, being pushed by one of the henchmen. "Bastards," he murmured, anger replacing fear. Frank held him firmly. "We can't confront them directly. There are too many and they're armed. I'm not going to leave her in their hands. We have the evidence. Now, Lucas, we can negotiate." While they were whispering, Victor was commanding the operation up above. "Search the entire area. They're here somewhere. And remember, I want Lucas alive." Emily, despite the evident fear in her eyes, maintained a dignified silence. When the men began to descend toward the creek, Victor held her by the arm. "You know, Miss Watkins, I admire your loyalty. Few would risk so much for someone they barely know." "I know him better than you ever will," she replied, with a courage that surprised even herself. Victor smiled coldly. I doubt it. I knew Lucas Mitchell for more than 10 years. A brilliant man, but too ambitious for his own good. He never knew when to stop digging. What did you do to Connor? She suddenly asked, remembering the fragments of information she had heard in New York. Victor's smile faded. An interesting question. It seems our friend Lucas shared his conspiracy theories with you. At that moment, a voice echoed from the darkness below. They're not theories, Victor. They're facts. And now I have proof. Ethan emerged from the shadows, his hands raised in surrender. The memory card gleamed between his fingers. "Lucas!" exclaimed Victor, genuinely surprised. "Or, should I say, Ethan? I heard you adopted a new name during your convalescence." "Release her," demanded Ethan, ignoring the sarcastic comment. "She has nothing to do with this." "On the contrary, she has everything to do with it. It was she who saved you, who hid you, even without knowing she was protecting the man who could destroy all our work." "What work, Victor?" "Replacing Connor with an imposter, assassinating anyone who discovered the truth." Victor sighed like a teacher faced with a particularly obtuse student. "You always saw everything in black and white, Lucas. The business world doesn't work that way. William was aging, losing his firm grip. Connor, for his part, was an irresponsible playboy, more interested in parties than in commanding an empire. Imagine what would happen to Mitchell Enterprises, with the thousands of jobs that depend on it, if control passed to such incompetent hands. So you replaced him with someone you could control." "Correct. A talented actor with a similar appearance trained for months to assume the role, and it worked perfectly. The new Connor was exactly what the company needed, disciplined, focused, obedient, until I discovered it." "Until you discovered it," agreed Victor. "Always the smartest one in the room, aren't you, Lucas? You should have accepted my partnership offer when you had the chance." As they talked, Ethan had slowly approached, climbing the slope. He could see Emily clearly now, her eyes conveying a silent message of hope and fear. "And where is the real Connor?" he asked, buying time while Frank positioned himself in the shadows. "Living very well, believe me. An isolated villa in the south of France, a generous allowance, and the request to never return to America. It was a mutually beneficial agreement." "An agreement made under threat, I imagine." Victor shrugged. "Persuasion is an art, Lucas. You of all people should appreciate that." The decisive moment was approaching. Ethan could feel Frank moving along the side, ready to create a distraction. With or without complete memory, something in his blood recognized the pattern of a critical negotiation. "I have a proposal, Victor. The memory card with all the evidence in exchange for the safety of Emily and the Watkins family." "And you? Aren't you concerned about your own safety?" "I'm more concerned with justice. This card contains not only evidence of Connor's replacement, but also of the financial schemes you've been operating in the shadow of Mitchell Enterprises. Money laundering, bribing environmental inspectors, large-scale tax evasion." Victor paled slightly, his composure faltering for the first time. How did I find out? Maybe I am the smartest in the room. Or maybe you underestimated people's loyalty. Not everyone was satisfied with your parallel leadership, Victor." The bluff worked. Victor hesitated, evaluating his options. It was at this moment that Frank made his move. Emerging from the shadows with a flaming branch, hastily lit with a lighter, he threw it toward the vehicles, creating a momentary distraction. Victor's men instinctively turned toward the threat, and Ethan seized the chaos to advance. In a quick movement, he pulled Emily away from Victor, cutting her bonds with a pocket knife that old Joe had lent him. The two ran for the protection of the forest, while Frank did the same by another path as they had planned. "Get them!" shouted Victor, but the darkness of the night and the density of the vegetation favored the fugitives. Ethan and Emily ran like never before, guided only by the glow of the moon filtering through the treetops. Behind them, they heard shouts and the sound of pursuers plunging into the woods. "Where are we going?" asked Emily, breathless. "To the top of the mountain. I know a place where we can hide until dawn." They ran for almost an hour, climbing higher and higher, until they reached a rocky formation that offered a privileged view of the valley. There, Protected by large blocks of stone, they finally stopped to catch their breath. "How did you find me?" asked Ethan, still incredulous to have Emily there, safe by his side. "I went to Mitchell Enterprises headquarters in New York. I was desperately looking for you when they intercepted me. Victor, he showed me photos of you, of Lucas, before the accident. He said he knew I was hiding you. I'm sorry for involving you in all this. Don't be. If it weren't for that, we'd never have met." In the darkness of the night, their gazes met with an intensity that made further words unnecessary. Ethan took her hands in his. "When all this is over. When all this is over," she completed, "we'll decide together what to do." At dawn, they met Frank at the agreed point, a natural cave known only to the oldest residents of the village. There they examined the contents of the memory card, using the laptop Frank carried. The evidence was more devastating than they could have imagined. Not only did it confirm Connor's replacement, but it revealed a complex scheme of financial fraud that Victor had been operating for years, diverting millions from Mitchell Enterprises to offshore accounts. "With this we can end him," said Frank, "but we need to reach William directly without intermediaries. Victor controls practically all access to the old man." "There's a way," Emily suddenly said. "Martha always says there's no lock without a key." Her plan was bold but simple. William Mitchell would be present at the inauguration of a new factory unit of Mitchell Enterprises in Riverdale, the closest town to Pine Hollow, that very afternoon. It was a perfect opportunity for a direct confrontation in public, where Victor would have difficulty intervening. While Frank prepared digital copies of the evidence and sent them to secure contacts, including prosecutors and journalists he trusted, Ethan and Emily prepared for the decisive confrontation. Hours later, dressed in borrowed clothes to avoid drawing attention, they infiltrated the crowd waiting for the inauguration ceremony. William Mitchell, visibly weakened by age and disease, was on the stage, alongside Connor and Victor, who kept his eyes glued to the audience, as if sensing danger. The moment came when William stood up to give a speech. Ethan, gathering all his courage, advanced toward the stage. "William Mitchell," he called, his voice echoing through the silent environment. All eyes turned to him. Victor paled, recognizing him immediately. "My name is Lucas Mitchell, your nephew, whom you thought was dead." A shocked murmur ran through the audience. William, stunned, dropped the microphone. "Lucas," he murmured, unable to believe what he was seeing. "I have evidence of a conspiracy within Mitchell Enterprises. Evidence that the man at your side is not Connor, but an imposter placed by Victor to control the company and facilitate his money diversion schemes." Chaos ensued. Security guards advanced, but journalists present were already recording everything. Victor tried to intervene, but William, with an authority that seemed to have resurfaced from the ashes, ordered everyone to step back. Let him speak. In the hours that followed, the truth came to light like an avalanche. The evidence was presented. Witnesses emerged, including Frank, who revealed everything he knew about Victor's years of manipulation. The fake Connor, cornered, confessed his role in the farce, revealing how he had been recruited and trained in Europe before returning to America, assuming the identity of the true heir. The Mitchell empire trembled, but did not fall. William, demonstrating the strength that had made him one of the most respected businessmen in the country, personally took control of the situation. Victor was detained by the authorities, as were his main accomplices. A complete audit was initiated in all companies of the group. As for the real Connor, a team was sent to France to locate him and offer his reintegration into the family, an offer that surprisingly he refused, preferring to maintain his anonymity and tranquil life away from the spotlight. For Lucas, who still preferred to be called Ethan, the reward came in the form of recognition. William, deeply grateful for his nephew's loyalty, offered him a prominent position in the companies, but Ethan had other plans. A week after the tumultuous event in Riverdale, he returned to Pine Hollow with Emily. On the porch of the Watkins house, under the same starry sky where they had shared so many conversations, he finally said what was in his heart. "My memory has almost completely returned. I remember who I was, my life as Lucas Mitchell. But you know what I discovered? That I prefer the person I became here, with you." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with contained tears. "And who is that person?" "Someone who learned the value of simple things. Someone who discovered that there's more fulfillment in cultivating medicinal plants and helping people than in accumulating power and wealth. Someone who found a home not in mansions or luxurious offices, but here, in these mountains." "And what does that person want to do now?" Ethan looked at the horizon, where the first lights of day were beginning to appear. "I refused William's offer. Instead, I proposed the creation of a foundation, funded by Mitchell Enterprises but independent, dedicated to environmental preservation and sustainable development of communities like Pine Hollow. A foundation that we can lead together, if you want." Emily's smile was her answer. In that moment, under the nascent light of a new day, Ethan knew he had finally found his true place in the world, not as the heir to an empire or the guardian of secrets, but as the partner of the woman who had saved him not only from death, but from a life without meaning. And so, among the mountains of Pine Hollow, a new chapter began, not just for Ethan and Emily, but for the entire village, which would soon become a model of sustainable development and cultural preservation, inspiring communities throughout the country. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Emily's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the link to the left. If you enjoyed this tale of mystery and love in the American mountains, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of human life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're eager to read your comments about what you thought of this romance, full of twists and turns.